Cold air bites like iron, frost clings to the ropes, to the splintered platform, to the iron ring that anchors Mira's shackles. She stands where the morning sun can't reach, chin down, breath a pale thread that disappears as fast as it forms. Around her, the marketplace breathes in harsh, hungry rhythms. Boots scrape, coins knock, laughter breaks like glass and leaves edges. Omega female, the auctioneer calls, voice flat with routine. Literate, claims healer's training. A ripple of amusement slides through the crowd. Someone snorts, someone else says, what good's a healer when wolves knit bone by noon? Mira keeps her eyes on the boards. She has learned the rules of survival: be quiet, be small, be nothing. A month ago, she thought skill mattered. Then raiders burned her home and sold what was left. The strong died first. The useful were taken. The rest were stacked like firewood and priced by pound. The auctioneer's hand jerks her face up. Fingers smell of onions and old beer. Show your teeth, she obeys. The world blurs a circle of faces, eyes that weigh and throw away, mouths that twist on easy cruelty. When he lets go, her chin snaps down again like it's on a string. Starting bid. 50 silver. Silence. A gull cries over the rooftops as if mocking the number. 30. Then, he tries, cheerful cracking at the edges. Trained hands. Good for a household. Or a kennel, if you're particular. A chuckle mean lazy. Boots thud closer. A man with a broken nose and meat hook hands appraises her like he's deciding how long a tool will last. 15, he says. Skinny thing, won't eat much. 15. The word scratches the back of her skull. Mira swallows the fire that wants to climb out of her chest. Fire gets you beaten. Quiet gets you fed. Sometimes 20 would be more fitting, the auctioneer says, desperation peeking through his patter. She's not damaged. Coordination's fine. Fingers steady, show them, girl. Mira extends her hands. They tremble only a little. She thinks of the herb room back home, the bright yellow of yarrow, the sweet rot of comfrey roots drying on twine. She thinks of elder hands guiding hers. Steady pressure, little one. Bones are stubborn. Be more stubborn. 15. The man repeats, already grinning with ownership. The auctioneer inhales to argue and then the air changes. It isn't a sound at first. It's pressure, like storm front meeting mountain. The hum of the market falters. A baker's boy pauses with a tray on his shoulder. A mother's hand tightens on a child's coat. Words turn brittle in mouths and shatter into quiet. Mira's wolf, small, starved, sleeping deep since the capture, stirs and presses low. Instinct whispers the oldest command. Don't meet the eyes of what can end you. The crowd parts without anyone saying move. Knees find dirt. Not all, enough. He comes through like inevitability. Dark hair windswept from the road. Travel cloak shouldered open over armor shaped to a body made to carry it. The kind of stillness that reads as danger held on a chain he forged himself. Where he moves, space organizes around him. The marketplace makes room as if the cobbles remember his step. Your Majesty, someone breathes. The words snatch and fly. And then dozens of mouths are saying my king without being told to. The auctioneer goes the color of old parchment. Alpha King Ronan, an honor would you like to inspect? He doesn't look at the man. He looks at Mira, a gaze like hammered metal, amber, steady, unblinking, meets her lowered face, not to pin it, but to measure it. She keeps her eyes on the line where board meets shadow, heart hammering in a trapped bird rhythm. 100 gold. He says. The marketplace exhales in one shocked, ragged sound. Somewhere, a coin slips from someone's fingers and hits stone with a lonely chime. Hookhand's mouth opens. Nothing comes out. 100. The auctioneer stammers, voice skidding, as sold. Sold to His Majesty, Alpha King Ronan of Blackstone. He says it too fast, tripping over the new future he just made. The chain tightens as a guard steps up. The guard's name is Rowan, Mira thinks, because the other soldiers shape it with respectful ease. He is tall, broad, scar-kissed across the jaw. His eyes note everything and offer nothing. He doesn't touch her yet. He is waiting for something. Ronan steps onto the platform. Up close, his presence is colder and hotter at once. A paradox that smells of pine and iron and distance. He stops the space of a hand away, close enough that Mira hears the slow, disciplined glide of his breath. You're a healer, he says. Not a question, not exactly. A line thrown between them to see if it holds. She has not been allowed many truths. She chooses one now. Yes, my lord, her voice is small from disuse. Sand catches on the word lord and scrapes. Elder's training? Yes, his gaze dips to her shackles. A flicker of something distaste, anger, moves along his jaw and is gone. Rowan, he says without raising his voice. The guard is already moving. Sire, unlock, feed, water, salve. She rides with the column, on. The auctioneer blinks. Unshackle. But Protocol 4 Ronan looks at him, and the man stops speaking as if his tongue forgot its trade. Rowan produces a key that sounds too gentle for the word iron. The man with meat hook hands takes a step like he might object, then remembers he's a coward and finds somewhere else to be. Cold leaves the metal and enters Mira's bones as the cuffs fall. Red rings score her wrists. Rowan's mouth tightens almost imperceptibly. Food, he tells a junior soldier. Now, the boy sprints like a man running from his own death. A moment later, a heel of bread and a wedge of hard cheese are in Mira's palms. She bites. The flavor is so plain it's miracle enough to make her eyes sting. Ronan steps down. The crowd rainets behind him as water closes over a moving keel. He does not look back. He rarely has to. Mira follows when Rowan gestures. The world is sharp with little details. A woman's scarf caught on a splinter. A dog with one ear who is very wise. A gull that steals a fish's eye and takes to the air with a victory scream. She is dizzy with the simple act of walking without being dragged. Outside the square, soldiers wait with easy patience, like men used to obeying and being obeyed by equals. Their armor isn't polished for show. It is maintained for use. Some of them flick glances at Mira as if trying to solve a math problem. What is worth 100 gold that looks like that? They mount. She does not. Rowan studies her rag-wrapped feet, takes in the blood darkening the cloth, then swings down from his horse and holds the stirrup for her like she matters. She flinches anyway from the sudden courtesy. He says nothing as he boosts her up. They ride. Cobble becomes dirt, becomes goat track. The city loosens its grip, then disappears behind a curtain of pines. Wind combs the trees and returns with secrets. Mira keeps her hands balled in the cloak Rowan has thrown across her knees, absorbing its warmth. Its smell of smoke and wool and something that makes her chest tight with lostness. She risks a look at Ronan. He rides a black horse that moves like a thought in his mind. He does not look at her. He doesn't need to for her to feel the gravity of his decision like a new moon tugging the tides. Why 100 gold for an Omega no pack wanted? The obvious answer is wrong. She can feel it. The man with meat hook hands wanted labor. The king bought something else. Or bought a chance at something else. She looks at her hands. They are steady now that they hold food. They remember herbs and heat, and the weight of a stranger's pain finding a better place to live. The trail pitches upward. Snow appears in the shadows between rocks like secrets that refuse to melt. Voices carry in the thin air low, joking, alive. No one calls her by a number. No one calls her at all. At a bend where the world drops away to trees, Ronan raises one hand and the column slows. He turns his head just enough that she can see a line of his profile. The scar near his ear he doesn't hide. The clean cut of a soldier who learned to be king after he learned to live. Do you know why I bought you? He asks. Mira's mouth goes dry. No, my lord. Good, he says. Neither do they. His gaze sweeps the ranks without contempt and finds her again. Eat, rest when you can. Speak to no one about your work unless I ask it. Yes, my lord. Ronan looks past her to the ridge, to weather building, to a kingdom that has taught him to expect knives at sunset and winter at noon. And Mira, he adds, as if he's only now remembering he doesn't know her name and has decided to know it anyway. Don't run. The roads are worse than men. He heels the horse forward. The column moves again. She sits small under the cloak and watches her breath vanish into cold. The world she knew burned and ended. This one has not begun. Between those two edges she rides. A question bought for a price no one dared to challenge, with hands that refused to forget what they were made for. Snow began as a rumor along the ridgelines, thin veils lifting off the pines, a pale breath in the hollows. By the time the column left the last shepherd's wall behind, the rumor had teeth. Wind came down the mountain with a hunter's patience, slipping under cloaks, biting toes through cracked leather. The world narrowed to white and the sound of hooves finding purchase, where even goats thought twice. Mira rode small beneath Rowan's spare cloak, fingers hidden in its fold, counting her breaths the way healers count pulse. Steady, steady, steady. Her feet draw from weeks on stone and rope throbbed with a distant heat that meant trouble. She pulled the cloak tighter, but the cold found seams anyway. Soldiers' voices carried oddly in the storm, as if the snow listened and gave the words back sharpened. King paid a king's ransom for a curse. Someone muttered behind her. A healer. Another scoffed. Like stitching skin makes you a wolf. Omega luck. See if a whiteout doesn't swallow us now. Mira kept her gaze on the black curve of Ronan's horse ahead. The Alpha King sat the saddle like the mountain had grown him. Weight balanced, hands easy on the reins. Attention everywhere without ever jerking to any one place. Snow threaded his hair silver at the temples. He didn't look back. A gust shouldered the column. The trail knifed along a drop where spruce tops showed like drowned men's fingers far below. Rowan's horse shifted under her with admirable insult this again, and Mira swallowed against the tilt in her stomach. The cold had a sound now, a high, glassy note that sang in her ears. She flexed her toes inside torn wraps and felt almost nothing. Another hour and the world blurred. The white didn't fall anymore, it roared. It clawed at eyes, found throats, erased features until every rock wore the same mask. Men wrapped scarves to their brows. Jokes dwindled to grunts. The road disappeared, appeared, lied. When the trail steepened, Ronan raised his hand and the column bunched. Dismount, Rowan called down the line, loud enough to be heard, calm enough to be imitated. Ropes on. Single file, Mira slid awkwardly to the churned snow. Her feet met it with a hiss of pain that flashed black at the edges of her sight. She put her palm on the horse's flank to steady a world that wouldn't hold still. Rope moved hand to hand practical, knotted, ice stiff, but when one end reached Mira, her fingers wouldn't close. Numb too long, they belonged to someone who hadn't learned grasping yet. She tried again. Cloth slipped. The rope fell. Here, a voice said, not impatient, not kind, just there. Ronan's glove closed over the rope, then over her wrist, his grip firm as a brace on a broken beam. He wrapped the line twice around her palm, then once more over her wrist where numb skin might betray her. Tied a hitch that would hold even if she forgot how to. Keep it high, he said, angling her arm so the pull stayed in muscle, not joints. The distance between them was a breath's width. Snow hissed against his stubble and melted there. Walk behind Rowan. If the wind throws you, go with it and lean back into the rope. Do not fight where your feet can't stand. She managed, yes, my lord. But her jaw worked like cold iron. His gaze flicked to her feet. The scraps of cloth had frozen into gray stone over red. He swore under his breath, a word that sounded older than any king. Rowan, here, take point. I'll bring her. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He lifted the rope from Rowan's hand to his own belt, shortened it until she could feel its quiet weight connect them. Then he took the lead, boots cutting steps, shoulders making wind's angles loosen just enough for another to pass. The column followed the path he rode into the storm they climbed. Snow erased each footprint the moment it formed, as if the mountain resented instruction. Mira set her feet where his had been and still slipped, thighs burning, the rope a constant instruction at her wrist. Here now, with me. She tried to make her breaths as quiet as the men's, but they came ragged, shallow to fast. Somewhere her wolf crouched and watched with yellow eyes, conserving what little heat and stubbornness they had left. They crossed a saddle where wind did not blow so much as exist. The sky ceased to be above. It became a direction from which the cold attacked. Mira's vision tightened to a tunnel-dark coat in front, white beyond, the small black of her own boots. The rope tugged. She moved. The rope eased. She tried to stand still like a tree that believed in spring. Her knees went without permission. She would have gone down and kept going. An ugly slide toward the spruce fingers below. If the rope hadn't snapped song in her wrist and hauled. She collided with a wall that resolved into Ronan's back. He turned faster than balance allowed. He took her stumble into himself and bled it away. His hand found the notch above her elbow and held until her feet remembered the shape of ground. Don't lock your knees, he said close to her ear. His breath was warm where the wind couldn't pry it away. Soft, bend, think of it like moving through water. Sorry, she said, and hated the word as soon as it left. A habit built in uglier winters. Save apologies for mistakes, he said. This is weather. They went on. Time lost its arithmetic and became a stretch of rope and breath and the discipline of not quitting. When the wind shoved, he leaned into it first and took some of its appetite. When a drift hit a hole, he stepped wide and set a boot where she could see the safe place. He did not speak again because men who need to be told everything die on mountains. She mirrored him because women who wait to be told everything die. To dot at last, Rowan's arm rose against the storm. He pointed to a dark wedge in the snowfield rock overhang like a broken tooth. The column angled toward it and disappeared under stone one by one, the wind dropping so suddenly the quiet rang. Men shook snow from cloaks, coughed, spat ice. The air in the lee was 10 degrees kinder and felt like summer. Mira's legs shook once she stopped moving. Standing still let all the aches she'd outrun catch up. Swaggering, she leaned a shoulder against rock and concentrated on convincing fingers to work the knot at her wrist. They moved like gloves filled with water. Ronan stepped in front of her. He untied the rope without looking. Up close, the storm had left a map on him. Ice clung to lashes, beard, hair. He shrugged out of his cloak and draped it around her shoulders without fuss. When she opened her mouth to protest some pale reflex toward fairness, he said, "Heat moves to cold." You are smaller. He took her foot in his hands. It should have shocked her. It did, but not the way she expected. Not shame, not fear. Surprise, bright and almost painful, like looking into a window at a life you've never seen but recognize. He eased the frozen wraps apart as if unbandaging a wound, each loose in turn revealing red and white and the bluish numb that worried healers. His thumbs pressed gently into the soul, testing blood's memory. Rowan, he said without looking up. Pot, fire, we'll have tea. Mira's voice came out thin. You shouldn't, debatable, he said, and a corner of his mouth twitched as if some private joke caught him unawares. You'll lose toes if we let this hold. I know, she murmured. It was easier to whisper knowledge than to insist on any dignity in the face of feeling returning, a lightning run of pain up nerves that had been quiet too long. He poured snow into a leather cup and held it between his hands to warm enough to wet cloth, then bathed her feet with patience she hadn't seen since elders taught apprentices over summer herbs. Behind them, soldiers had settled into practiced stillness, some squatting with backs to rock, some standing like stakes, all pretending not to watch the king kneel over an Omega's feet. Their whispers slid and snagged, cursed, but coddled, someone said, or she's some tool. Storm broke when we stopped, another offered, as if the fact itself undermined their mutiny. It broke because rock gets between you and wind, Rowan said mildly from the small fire he coaxed to life. He didn't look up, not because your tongues wagged. The pot began to talk. The smell of tea, faint, bitter comforting, cut through the wet wool stink of the storm. Ronan handed Mira a cup when the steam curled strong, his gloved hand steady, not lingering. Drink, he said. She sipped and found her mouth again. The heat went down and woke a map of her throat, chest, belly, marking each place it passed as possible. Tears stung without permission and cooled fast on her cheeks. She wiped them with the back of her hand, embarrassed at her own body's honesty. Why did you buy me? It slipped out. She uncorked it. Pain and quiet made room. Ronan considered the overhang's mouth, where the wind spent itself and whined, like an animal kept outside a door. When I was a boy, he said, the healer in our pack set a bone in my arm with an apple twig and a story. His voice did not soften. It went somewhere far and came back with less weight. We buried her in winter. Some prices never leave. Mira waited, as a student waits when the teacher is not finished but must find the next word. He looked down at her feet again, checked color returning, wrapped them in dry cloth with soldier's economy. You asked to serve, he said. You will. When I call, she nodded, the tea steaming her face, the cloak heavy and borrowed and warm. Outside, the mountain had decided to breathe instead of bite, only for a while. But for a while sometimes saves lives. Men settled, the rope coiled neat at Ronan's hip, white flecks melting along the plate. You're alone, she said before she could stop it. The storm made people truthful. It stripped language to bone, even with all of them. He glanced at the line of warriors in the half-cave. So are they. Rowan doesn't seem alone. Rowan is stubbornly alive, Ronan said, and the nod smile again. It looks like company from a distance. Silence rested between them, not the brittle quiet of courts, but the kind that mends something microthin and vital. He stood finally and took his cloak from her shoulders to shake the snow, then laid it back without ceremony. When he stepped away, the absence of his heat felt like a draft through a cracked wall. Move when I move, he said as Rowan stamped the fire safe, and the men pulled on their gloves. We take the gorge and the two-stone bridge. Light fades fast. Mira looked at her wrapped feet. Pain pulsed, but it pulsed alive. She took the rope when he held it out and tied it herself this time, the hitch neat despite the shake in her hands. Outside, the white waited, patient as hunger. The king who never spared mercy stepped into it, and the girl everyone called a curse followed, tethered to him by a line no wind could quite cut. The iron keep rose out of the mountain as if the stone had clenched a fist and never unclenched. Its walls were not built so much as revealed black plains, arrow slits like narrow eyes, stairways hugging rock with the stubbornness of ivy made of iron. Sound carried strangely here. A dropped pail could be heard 3 courtyards away. A whispered insult might as well be carved in slate. Morning began with the drum, to strokes, a pause, to more. The yards filled with breath and boot and steel. Mira learned the rhythm of the place fast, learned because the fortress insisted. You either moved to its pulse or were crushed under it. Rowan set her pallet in the lower quarter among scullions and stable hands, pressed sauve and clean wraps into her palms, and left her to a thin blanket and a thicker quiet. Work, he said simply, as if the word were both assignment and blessing. No chains, no escort. Freedom fenced by stone and expectation. She worked, She carried water hot enough to sting Grip into kitchens where heat pooled like a second sun. She swept soot from hearths that remembered winters no one survived. She learned to step aside for warriors without flinching and to carry her head low enough to go unnoticed but high enough to avoid looking hunted. The first rule found her by accident. A kitchen girl yelped as a pot slipped and sloshed, the boil catching skin. Mira was beside her before thought caught up, hands closing around the red wrist, healer's light rising with the reflex of breath. "Don't," Lysa hissed, appearing like a warning pulled out of shadow. The stable hand's eyes were wide enough to show whites. "Not here." Mira swallowed the light. It burned the back of her tongue like a swallowed sob. She let go. The girl bit her lip until it bled and said, "I'm fine," in the voice of someone who has learned that declarations create reality. Later, in a quieter corner, Lysa wrapped onion skin and cool cloth around the burn. "It'll scar," she said apologetically. "Scars are proof," the girl muttered, half proud, half sick. "They can't say I didn't do my part. What do scars prove?" Mira asked, though she knew. She wanted to hear the fortress speak with one of its many mouths. "That you didn't ask to be spared," Lysa said softly. "That you know pain is the price." The second rule arrived stamped in iron. General Varric took the yard at mid-morning. He did not shout. He did not need to. His presence pulled the lines of men and boys tighter, drew spines straighter, made silence fall into formation. Tall hair iron gray, eyes pale to near colorless. He had the look of metal cooled to long in water, temper drawn out to hardness. "Pain is a teacher," he said, voice carrying without effort. "Mercy confuses students." A boy Soren stood in the first row, jaw set like a clenched hand. The leg Mira had helped in the storm no longer shook. He moved with the caution of someone who had learned the cost of mistakes and still chose motion. "Begin," Varric said. They ran drills that drained color from skin. Leap, land, roll, rise. Strike, parry, pivot, strike until arms trembled. When one recruit slowed, another took his weight. When two went down, the row closed, absorbed the gap, kept pace. Soren misjudged a pivot and his ankle slid. He cursed once and corrected, then corrected again, gutting through. Varric walked past without looking, but Mira felt the general's attention like a knife pressed lightly to throat there, ready, making compliance easy. A spear line faltered. Varric stopped. He took the spear from a boy whose hands shook and set its butt against the boy's in step. "Grip," he said, and when the boy obeyed, Varric leaned in slowly until the shaft bowed and the boy's arch screamed. "Strength comes where?" Varric asked calmly. "From pain." The boy gasped. "No." Varric's mouth didn't change. "From holding through pain." He released the bow slowly so the sting stretched as lesson. Again, Mira's fingers curled until nails bit her palm. In the shade of the colonnade, she breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the elders taught when rage would interfere with repair. You can't stitch a torn lip with a shaking hand. You can't save a life while screaming at blood for leaving. By noon she knew the third rule not as a saying but as a lived thing. You matter only as proof. Proof that the old codex still ruled. Proof that softness had been hunted to the edges and left there. Proof that their enemies real and imagined would not find Blackstone untended. Ronan crossed the far balcony once, speaking with Counselor Eddie, a woman whose hair was braided with bits of wire and who wrote as he spoke. Her quill scratching wore into neat lines. He did not look down. Varric did not look up. The keep managed its divided heart with the indifference of a machine. In the laundry afternoon, Mira found a boy crying into a shirt as if linen could swallow sound. He was older than Soren, younger than Rowan, the age where belief calcifies into something that either carries or crushes you. His knuckles were purple crescents, where a shield had failed him. Mira sat on a bench across from him and pretended to mend a hem. She didn't speak. The first thing the fortress had taught her was that words attract watchers. She threaded needle in silence, let the motion anchor her, and waited. "People talk to steadiness when they are drowning. My mother died in spring," he said at last, voice raw from swallowing. "Traders took our sheep. The Alpha paid for her burial. General says pain made me a soldier." He coughed a laugh that wasn't. "I think the ground just took the only soft thing I had." Mira stitched. The needle pinched flesh once. She moved it and breathed again. "Softness doesn't rot," she said when the yard outside drowned the smallest sounds in steel and shouts. "It composts, feeds the next season." He blinked at her like she'd begun speaking a language the keep had outlawed. He reached for the shirt. She slid her mending to him without touching his fingers and left before any other eyes could learn his grief and use it. By late day, word had spread. The Omega bought for gold had hands that glowed. A stable boy whispered it to a Fletcher. A Fletcher's apprentice repeated it near a water but where Varric's adjutant paused to drink. Things that should have been private grew legs and walked. Mira felt it in the way corridors narrowed when she passed, in the way conversations flattened to silence that was not respectful, only wary. Lysa's mouth became a line. You must be smoke, she said, seen and gone before anyone thinks to blame the fire. They'll need me, Mira said. It was not hope. It was simple math. Men injured. Men die without aid. She existed. They'll need the story about not needing you more, Lysa answered, and kissed Mira's temple like a sister might before a bad shift. The need came before dusk in the yard. A boy took a spear but to the temple and went down boneless, breath snagging. Varric looked at him like a craftsman assessing a flawed piece. Move him, he said. He'll wake or he won't. Heads turned, some toward the boy, some toward Mira where she stood near the colonnade with a folded stack of cloth. Her light rose like a tide under skin. Her feet had already chosen a path before the rest of her could argue. She took one step. Don't, Rowan's voice said, very quietly, from behind a pillar. She froze, pulse slamming. He stepped into sight, casual on purpose, hands empty, posture loose enough to look unthreatening and trained enough to be anything else in a breath. Ronan said emergencies, he murmured. You heal one feint, you'll be summoned for a paper cut to make a point. Varric wants the excuse, it's his head, she whispered. It is, Rowan said. His eyes did not leave the yard. And I'll take him to the infirmary now and the medica will leech him and watch. If he turns, I'll send a runner to you, the boy groaned. The world diced into seconds. Mira's hands shook with the instinct to do. She closed them on the cloth until it wrinkled like a throat. Restraint tasted like iron and old prayer. She made herself step back into the shade and become stone. Varric's gaze slid across the colonnade, found her, measured the not moving. He smiled, not kindly, not victory, recognition. So you can learn. The Medican old woman with eyes like river stones arrived with a basin and a single leech pinched between bone fingers. Lift him, she ordered. The recruits obeyed. The leech found blood. The boy breathed. Life stuttered, then limped forward. See, Varric said to no one and everyone. Pain teaches. Mira stared at the leech as if staring could change its nature. The elders had taught herbs and poultices, splints and stitches. They had taught when to use leeches and when not to. They had taught first, above all, do no harm to the body that has to carry the soul after you leave. She stood still until her body understood the command. She folded the cloth until all the creases agreed. She put it on a shelf aligned with other folded things. Night came down, and the keep shrugged into another kind of hardness. Torches made orange rivers on black walls. The drum sounded once, then twice. The drills ended. The bruises began to think about their lessons. In the corridor to her pallet. Mira passed Varric. He did not slow. He did not look. But he spoke, and the words brushed her shoulder like a cold hand. Mercy rots when left in the open, he said. Best buried or burned. Mira kept walking. She did not answer. Restraint is not surrender. It is selection. She slid into her blanket and let her hands remember where to place pressure on a cracked rib. How to bind a sprain so it holds but blood still moves. Her light hummed under skin, patient, banked, waiting for the door Ronan had promised to open. By her window slit, the mountain breathed. Somewhere far along the walls, a lone wolf called and another answered, threading sound through stone like a suture sewing the night shut. The drum split the morning cleanly, 2 strokes, a breath, to more than the yard answered with the thunder of bodies committed to pain. Frost clung to the flagstones like old salt. Mira carried a stack of folded cloth for the medica and kept to the colonnade's shadow, where the rock leaked a thin vein of warmth and anonymity. General Varric stalked the lines without hurrying. He never needed speed. Fear did his pacing for him. Forms, he said, and 100 trainees moved as one. Leap, land, roll, rise. Spear, pivot, counter. Hold. Soren was fourth in the second rank. Jaw set, breath measured. The boy had worn stubbornness like armor since the storm. Mira watched him the way a healer watches a candle in a draft, alert to the flicker, ready to shield the flame with a cupped hand if wind proved too proud. Higher, a sergeant barked as Soren took the vaulting horse. He complied, calves coiling, spine lengthening. He cleared the backbod but landed half on a wet patch the frost hadn't fully surrendered. His left foot slid. The right twisted beneath him at an angle that did not belong to human bone. The sound more a thick branch giving than a crack rolled through the yard. Soren fell and didn't bounce. His mouth opened, but the scream came late, as if pain had to run a corridor to find voice. Varric didn't flinch. He cut a glance toward the medica's table, where Mira had laid out cloth, splints, and the quiet lie of leeches in a jar. Move him, he said. Resume. Mira's body had already made the decision her mind feared. She was across the stone before the jar's glass finished shivering from the shock. She knelt at Soren's side. Heat pulled under his skin, the body's alarm bell ringing furiously. The leg below the knee lay wrong, the shin bowed where it should have run straight, the skin blanching with pressure that dared to become breach. Don't, Lysa hissed from somewhere behind. Mira Varric, Soren's eyes found Mira's face. He was trying to be the thing they demanded. Quiet, converted pain into grit. He failed with a sound that could have been a puppy kicked under a table. He grabbed the dirt with both hands as if it were rope. Breathe with me, Mira said, and she breathed slow and deep until his choked gasps began to mimic the rhythm. In, out, you're here. I'm here. She is not too. Varric started, but the yard had already caught the scent of drama. Breaths held, boots anchored. 100 bodies pretending they were still drilling watched the Omega kneel in the middle of a code older than any of them. Mira set her palms above and below the break without pressure. The elder's voice in memory, let the body tell you what it wishes to be again. Then show it you remember. Light rose under her skin, shy at first, a thought, then a conviction. It slid into her hands and warmed her bones. Her fingertips hummed like bees finding the old hive. Soren stared, the way people stare at sunrise when they thought night had married them for good. Varric stepped close, pale eyes like cold sky before snow. Stand up, he said, not to Soren, to her. We do not coddle weakness in my yard. This is not coddling, Mira said without looking up. The light gathered, braided into a bright thread she could guide. It is repair. Boots shifted. The sergeants hovered, waiting to see which king would own this morning. The man on the balcony or the man on the ground with the power to end a habit with a sentence. Soren's breath sawed. Mira closed her eyes and saw the bones as she had been taught to see them, to clean rods. A hinge above, a hinge below, muscle sheathing like woven cloth, vessels singing a red song. The break glared like a bent nail in a good board. She cupped the ends without touching and urged them to remember each other. The light obeyed, nuzzled edges close, whispered across the seam, you were whole once. Be stubborn about it. Soren gasped as sensation spilled into the foot. Mira pressed the shin gently and felt give become grip. Felt the heat of swelling recede like a tide that had tried and failed to take the land. Varric's voice fell the way a blade falls with two fingers guiding it. Stand up. Mira opened her eyes and turned her face enough that he could see her and she could see him without letting go of the work. After she said, the word hung naked, small and outrageous. The yard held its breath. Enough. Ronan's voice didn't cut the air so much as settle it. The single word reached the far wall and tucked itself into a corner, like an order that had found its home. He approached along the edge of the yard, soldiers parting and reforming in his wake with the unthinking precision of tide around a rock. He took in the scene in one sweep, Soren on the stone. Mira's hands lit as if catching sunlight no one else could see. Varric's mouth a line that promised austerity and unnamed consequence. Ronan did not look at Varric first. He looked at Soren's leg. Prognosis, 2 minutes, Mira said. It will hold when I'm done. You presume too, Varric began. Ronan lifted two fingers. The general's words, incredibly, obeyed the signal and sheathed themselves. The quiet was a living thing again, listening like a dog that fears one master and loves another. Explain the risk, Ronan said. Mira made herself speak calmly though her pulse beat hard against her tongue. If I stop now, the bones begin to knit badly. The pressure might burst the skin. Infection follows. He loses weeks to healing. Crocodor loses the leg, she breathed. If I finish, he's weight-bearing in a day. Ronan's gaze didn't waver. Finish. Varric's nostrils flared. The tiniest movement. But for a man who preached that control was king, it read like a shout. Sire, this undermines. Ronan turned his head. Only that, but the yard felt the temperature change. We keep soldiers on their feet, he said, the echo of yesterday's certainty now an edict. Not on their backs, proving what pain can teach. A murmur rolled through the ranks and died with a choked cough. Varric held his stillness like a man holding a door while a storm tried every seam. Mira returned to Soren. Almost, she said. Breathe. He obeyed. Tears pulled cleanly and didn't fall. The bright thread tightened its last stitch. She smoothed light along the seam as a carpenter runs a hand over a planed edge and feels the wood agree. The swelling ebbed further. Bones set the way they'd been intended. She let the light dim, then gutter, then go, leaving warmth like banked coals. Fatigue hit her with the whiplash of a runner who crossed a line and only then allowed legs to tell their side of the story. She swallowed it and rocked back on her heels. Test, she said gently. Soren looked to Varric by old habit. Varric's jaw clenched hard enough to pale the skin in front of his ears. Soren set his palms, pushed, rose. He put weight on the healed leg cautiously, then a little more, then stood fully, the terror in his eyes bleeding out into wonder. A cheer sprang up and died mid-birth. stifled by 100 throats remembering the rules. Ronan's mouth didn't move much, but his eyes warmed by an inch. Eat, he told Soren. Report to your sergeant at second bell. No running today. Yes, my lord. The boy's voice cracked on lord, broke like ice into water, and then held. Ronan looked at Mira. For a heartbeat, the yard shrank to the square of space the two of them shared. Caused fatigue, she said. She didn't mention the tremor in her hands or the ache digging under her ribs. He saw both anyway. She knew he did. He nodded as if she'd answered with more than one word. Varric repositioned his silence into something razor-thin. This display, he said, enunciating each syllable, teaches the ranks that pain can be avoided. That is not our doctrine. Ronan faced him fully now. Our doctrine, he said, voice even, is survival. Survival bought with softness erodes into loss. Varric replied. They must learn to hold through. They have learned, Ronan said. And the softness in the words wasn't mercy but restraint. Every day, in every yard, in every winter that did not kill them. I won't spend a boy's future to prove a point we have already proved. A long breath moved like weather over the faces watching. The sergeants looked at one another, at their men, at their king. An old man at the back, a veteran with white in his beard and scars that made his neck a terrain, inclined his head once. The motion spread in small, private acknowledgments. Varric did not bow. He did not need to. He stepped aside the smallest distance, which in the Iron Keep was a mile. Ronan turned to the ranks, formed to circles, his tone returned to work. Outer, continue forms. Inner, spear drills, half speed. Any man who falls is lifted by his fellows. We rise together, or we do not rise. The change slid into the morning like a wedge into a log's heart. It didn't split anything yet. It cracked a line into which later blows might fit. As bodies moved, Ronan spoke low, for Mira only. There will be objection. I assumed her hands had steadied. The fatigue remained, but the shaking had left like a fever breaking. When it comes, he said, eyes on the arc of spears, I will stand where you cannot. Do what you must and no more. Keep your light for what only you can do. Emergencies, she said. His mouth considered a smile and declined it. And moments that ought to be. She looked past him to Soren, who had taken his place, sweat bright on his temple, posture unconsciously taller for the knowledge that someone would not let him break and leave him there. Her chest ached with something that felt like grief relieved. Thank you, she said, and didn't know whether she meant for trusting her hands or for taking the weight she couldn't carry without being crushed. Ronan nodded once. Do not make me regret it. I won't, she said, and for the first time since chains, her voice sounded like a promise she could keep. He stepped away. The yard breathed again. Varric recalibrated his orbit. Cold moon deciding how to pull tides that had found a new shoreline. Lysa slid to Mira's side with a waterskin and a grin she tried to swallow and failed. You glowed in his face, Lysa whispered, reverent and horrified. By all the old gods, Mira, I mended a leg, Mira said. But she couldn't stop the answering tug at her mouth. Across the yard, Ronan spoke to a captain and didn't once look at Varric. Varric watched Ronan and didn't once look at Mira. The keep learned a new word and pretended it hadn't heard. The drums struck to mark the hour. The echoes climbed the walls and leapt to the mountains beyond, where something listened and, perhaps, approved. In the new cadence, Mira found a space to stand that was not shadow and not center, somewhere between, where a spark could breathe without attracting every wind. And Soren, obedient to instruction, did not run, but he walked without limping, and his friends tightened their circle as if to hold that small miracle safe. Night in the Iron Keep had its own heartbeat, slow, stone deep, the kind of quiet that remembered every scream and forgave none. Wind combed the battlements with cold fingers. Torches guttered in the corridors, as if the walls exhaled. Mira lay awake on her pallet and counted her breaths until the count failed her. After the yard, after Soren, after Ronan's impossible finish, sleep arrived like a guest who found the door barred. She sat up, wrapped her cloak tight, and listened. The keep was a sleeping beast. If you were careful, you could walk in its ribs without waking it. A knock, soft, authoritative, found her door. Who is it? She whispered. Guard duty, a voice said low. By order of the king. Come. Lysa stirred on the pallet across, blinking blearily. Mira touched two fingers to her lips, hushed, then lifted the latch. Two men waited, helms shadowing eyes, cloaks dull against the stone, posture to still. Their belts gleamed with oiled leather, their swords with the tidy menace of routine. The king wants you in the lower hall, the taller said. Now why? Mira asked. The question escaped before obedience could clench its hand over her mouth. Orders, the shorter said. He didn't sound impatient. He sounded like someone reciting the last line of a prayer he didn't believe. She tied her cloak. slid her feet into soft-soled shoes and followed. Candlelight skimming over walls that had learned to keep secrets. Down past the kitchen's old heat. Past the storerooms where salt slept in barrels. Past the cistern that held the mountain's cold heart. The stairs grew damp. The torches spread their light thin. "This isn't the lower hall," she said softly when the air changed from chilled to wet. "This is." The door opened onto the circular chamber where the keep kept its worst stories. The old holding cells, their bars like black teeth. The center ring where confession bled into silence. 3 more soldiers waited in the penumbra, faces half hidden. No standard, no captain to witness, no scribe to record. A warning crawled up Mira's spine like ice water. "Where is the king?" she asked. "Here," said a voice behind her, not Ronan's. Another stepped from the shadow between torches, pale eyes catching the light and returning it colder. General Varric didn't smile. He rarely did. His mouth was a straight line carving the night into compliant pieces. "General," Mira said, and felt the ground rename itself beneath her shoes. "Not lower hall. Not orders. Trap. You were summoned," Varric said. He looked at the world the way a butcher looks at a carcass, assessing cuts, losses, yield. "You came. Good. If the king requires me, he usually arrives," she said. The courage surprised her mouth. Fear kept pace in her chest but couldn't overtake it. Varric flicked 2 fingers. The guards moved like water. One pinned Mira's arms from behind, not cruel, efficient. Another took her chin and turned her face to the ring where hostages once learned the fortress' older grammar. The third stepped close enough that she smelled oiled steel and the faint, sweet metallic breath of silver. "Don't," she said, and the word came out a plea and a warning both. "If you harm me, he will." "Do what?" Varric asked mildly. "Cry?" He shook his head as if at a student who refused the lesson. "The king confuses survival with sentiment lately. Your glow has blinded him. I am here to restore his sight." "You mean to murder me in his name?" "I mean to excise rot," he said calmly. "And in the same cut, excise the weakness you planted in him." Something moved at the chamber's mouth, whined. "Shadow?" And then the real answer to her earlier question cut the air. "Stand down." Ronan hit the threshold like a door kicked by a necessary order. He had no crown, no cloak, only a black shirt, trousers, and a knife at his hip that looked like it had never been ceremonial. Rowan was a step behind him, eyes scanning, hands empty only because they hadn't needed to be anything else yet. "All of you," Ronan said, voice low enough to flatten the room. "Stand down." 2 of the guards shifted. The third didn't. Mira felt the blade of the knife he'd half-raised hesitate at her throat, then kiss it again. A bead of blood lifted like a red bead of truth. "Release her," Ronan said, and took 2 steps into the chamber so the torchlight licked his cheekbones and turned his eyes to hammered amber. Now Varric's chin lifted a degree. "You have allowed softness to enter our doctrine," he said. "You'll undo us for it. Tonight I end the experiment." Ronan's gaze didn't leave the knife. "You will remove that blade from her throat," he said, each word placed like a stone in a river to make a path. "Or I will remove your hand from your arm." The guard's knuckles whitened. He glanced at Varric. Orders needed a home. Varric spread his hands in a philosopher's shrug. "If you must," he told Ronan quietly, "kill your own men to preserve a slave. Prove me right." The move came not from Varric, not from the guard, but from the guard behind her left shoulder, a flash of silver, like a fish in black water, quick and precise, punching for Ronan's ribs. He had been waiting, not for a signal, but for the king to distract himself. Treachery requires such arithmetic. Ronan twisted enough to rob the blade of killing depth. It bit anyway, a cold flower blooming under his shirt. He grunted a sound like stone refusing to crack and caught the attacker's wrist. Snapped it against the post with clean math. The knife fell. The guard did, too. Then the silver began its work. Mira knew the smell of it, the wrong sweetness that slid along the edges of blood's iron. Wolves can heal from iron, steel, wood. Silver turned the body into a battlefield it couldn't map. Ronan staggered 1 step, then steadied, hand pressed to his side. Blood came up between his fingers like a dark suggestion. He did not look at it. "Rowan," he said, and the name was orders and history. Rowan was already moving, intercepting the second man who lunged. Steel sang. The chamber dissolved into the blunt music of violence, breath, grunt, impact, the dry clack of a skull on stone. Varric did not join the fight. He watched it with the same colder interest he might give a winter breaking the backs of trees that had the audacity to grow wrong. Mira tore free of the grip at her arms while the man holding her chose whether to guard his general or his throat. She went to Ronan because there was nowhere else in the room that made sense. He tried to wave her off with that same impossible, infuriating restraint he wore like a second uniform. "No," she said, and the word tasted like vow. Not here, he managed. His voice was thinner now. The silver had found veins. Its wrong light crawled out from under his palm. Here, she answered, and pressed her hands to his side. Heat leapt from her skin, desperate as a trapped bird. Light gathered in her palms, shocked to find the dark already occupied by another brightness silver's false sun. Varric's gaze snapped to her, pupils narrowing as if the glow hurt. Stop her, he said. To soldiers moved, but Rowan's body found both spaces they needed, and he filled them with pain that taught the correct lesson. No, he said conversationally, breathing a little harder. Don't. Ronan's knees threatened. Mira leaned into him, shared spine, borrowed strength. She closed her eyes and saw the wound from the inside, a blade's path torn through muscle, the slick edge of a rib, the slicker edge of peritoneum. The silver didn't sit. It prowled. It wanted to turn structure into soup. Focus, Ronan gritted, hands finding her shoulders as if anchoring himself to her could anchor him to the world. His breath warmed her hair. If you must, be still, she whispered, and sent her light into the blood like a mapmaker's lantern into a ruined city. The body remembered how to be whole. Her power reminded it firmly. The silver met her like another mind, cold, articulate, intent on undoing. It tried to climb her light the way winter climbs vines, to turn warmth brittle. She pushed it back, thread by thread, corralled it into the blade's channel and held it there, fighting to enemies, the wound and the thing that kept the wound from belonging to the man it lived in. Varric, Rowan called without looking, as if making conversation at a hearth instead of over bodies. If you leave now, you get to keep your men. Men are plentiful, Varric said. Resolve is scarce, scarcer every time you spend it murdering children's hopes, Rowan replied, and cracked a guard's head against the post in a punctuation so clean, it was almost grammar. Mira found the vein the silver had claimed and cupped it, until the poison's teeth slipped. She teased metal fragments toward the surface with heat and intention, until one bright shard kissed her fingertip and burned. She hissed and kept going. 2 more, 3, the fourth clung like a bird to tissue that didn't want to let go. She begged it left. Blood ran clean for a beat, then fuller, stronger. Good, Ronan said under his breath, not to her, not to himself, to the body that had agreed to stay. Good, hold it, Mira told the wound, voice shaking. Hold, she sealed vessels with light stitches, laid with over-torn muscle until the fibers remembered their work, closed the skin last. Because elders always said skin should hear the good news when the inside has already decided to survive. The glow dimmed as obedience replaced emergency. The chamber's torchlight reasserted itself around them like a kingdom taking back jurisdiction. Silence fell, not peace. Not yet, but the pause between bell strikes where the air prepares itself for consequence. Varric had not moved. His eyes were on Ronan's face, searching for the king he built and measuring the one he had. You have endangered everything, he said quietly. For this, I have defended the one thing that makes everything worth having, Ronan answered, just as quiet. He straightened slowly, testing the mend with soldier's skepticism. No wince, no stagger. He let his hand fall. His palm was red and his shirt a ruin. His eyes were bright and unsurrendered. Varric's gaze flicked to Mira, calculation, not a man looking at a life. She cannot stay. She will, Ronan said. Then you are not the king I made you. No, Ronan said, and the word was relief and verdict. I am not. Varric's mouth whitened. For the first time, anger pulled his stillness out of true. He turned to the remaining guards, to measure loyalty like grain, to drop their eyes. One didn't. The room gathered itself to become a different place, one where civil wars are born. Rowan's stance adjusted by a degree. He was ready to kill or die, and the ease of either on his face made Mira want to weep with something that wasn't fear. Varric, Ronan said, and his voice was no longer quiet or loud. It was final. You have a choice. Step away and live to learn with us, or step forward and be buried under the thing you refuse to understand. My doctrine does not negotiate, Varric replied. Mine does, Ronan said. With life, for a heartbeat, the world stood on a hinge. Then Varric tipped it the direction he had always intended. He reached for a knife that wasn't there. Rowan had kicked it down the corridor 10 breaths earlier and found his hand empty. Something in his face cracked, invisible to everyone but Mira, who recognized loss when it tried to hide in pride. He stepped back. Arrest him, Ronan told Rowan, and grief laced the order like a hair and bread thin, unavoidable, human. Rowan nodded. The 2 least wounded guards obeyed without enthusiasm. Varric didn't fight. He only held Ronan's gaze as if he could haul the old king back through the eyes of the new one. This path ends in ruin, he said, all paths end. Ronan returned. Some on purpose, they took Varric away. The chamber breathed out. Mira sagged then, the cost of light catching her by the ankle and pulling. Ronan caught her with the same hands that had just threatened to tear a man's arm off for touching her. Easy, he said, and steadied her until the room stayed put. You were stabbed, she said. As if he didn't know. You removed it, he said. As if she didn't know. Their foreheads leaned into a breath's distance, not touching, not daring. His eyes, close now, were the color of metal warmed by hand, not forge. Around them, the keep rearranged the furniture of its loyalties. Forbidden healing, Mira said. The words dry in her mouth. Not anymore, Ronan said, somewhere above on the outer wall. A watchman's horn sounded once, the ordinary note that meant a patrol had returned whole. In the damp underbelly of the fortress, Mira had returned a king whole. The two notes braided into one story the keep would have to learn how to tell without choking. Walk, he said gently. If you fall asleep here, Rowan will never let me forget it. She managed a breath that, against all reason, became the beginning of a laugh. She wiped blood from her hands with the edge of her cloak. It made a dark flag she hadn't meant to carry and found herself unwilling to let go. They climbed out of the underworld together. The torches hissed in their brackets. The stones watched. The night took back its rhythm, altered, stubborn, alive. Outside, the wind had changed direction as if the mountain had decided to breathe with them rather than against. Ronan woke with a name in his mouth and sunlight on his face. Mira, he breathed, the syllables rising with the first pale wash through the high windows of his chamber, catching in the silk of the bed curtains like a promise hung to dry. The ache in his side answered with a dull echo, pain present, but honest now, no longer the treacherous sweetness of silver. He pressed his palm to the bandage and felt warmth there that wasn't fever. It was the memory of light. Rowan sat in the chair by the hearth, boots planted, head tipped back against stone, asleep the way soldiers do, ready to be vertical in a blink. He came awake at the shift of sheets. You're here, Ronan said, seemed wise. Rowan replied, voice gravel smudged. He studied his king's eyes with the frankness of a man who had once hauled that same boy from a burning hut. Relief loosened the lines around his mouth. You're not gray. That helps. Ronan's half-smile hurt less than he'd expected. Where is she? At the window, Rowan said, and the word window contained an odd fondness. She wouldn't lie down. Kept watch like you'd slip out of your skin and run the wall if she blinked. The curtains parted. Mira stood in the wash of new day, hair unbound, cloak thrown over a shift that bore fingerprints of dried blood along the hem, hers and his, intertwined. Sunlight made a halo of dust around her, as if the air itself wanted a reason to glow. I told you not to wake the whole fortress, she murmured, but the scold failed. Her mouth softened with relief she hadn't let herself feel in the dark. You're too stubborn for poison. He reached for her without thinking. She crossed the room without pretending she wouldn't. Her fingers found his, cool from the glass. Their hands learned one another with a surety that made the rest of the world irrelevant for a breath. Thank you, he said simply. You said that last night. Her voice lowered, shy with the intimacy of memory. Say it again when you've eaten and stood. I'll say it each morning, he answered, and meant it. Rowan stood, stretched a kink from his back, and became business. Varric is confined in the West Tower. The council convenes at first bell. Rumor runs faster than treason. Half the keep already knows the shape of the truth, sharper in some mouths than others. He looked between them. You'll need to speak before the shape speaks for you. Ronan nodded. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and paused as the room tested him with a brief swim. Mira's hand steadied his shoulder without fanfare. You'll tear what I mended if you play at hero, she said. Slow obedience, he said wryly. At last I learn it. She narrowed her eyes, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. Stand, she allowed. Then breathe. He stood. The men held. He breathed. The ache felt earned. Rowan grunted approval, found a fresh tunic, and tossed it across. Ronan dressed under Mira's gaze with an ease that startled him. Privacy had always been armor here. Now it felt like a wall he didn't want between them. Eat, Mira said, and pressed a heel of bread and a cup of broth into his hands, as if he were any convalescent and not a king. He ate. Strength returned, not in a rush, but in the patient increments of morning taking the sky back from night. The first bell tolled. The sound traveled the corridors with purpose. Ready? Rowan asked. No, Ronan said, and smiled with teeth. But I am decided. They crossed the keep together, king, healer, captain, past maidservants who stopped mid-bow with tears in their eyes, past boys who straightened not from fear but from pride. Soren stood at a corridor's mouth, weight even on both legs, a piece of bread in his cheek and astonishment still new in his bones. He bowed so deeply his hair brushed his knees. "Thank you, my lord," he said to Ronan first, then to Mira, earnest as sun. "Train," Ronan told him, "and eat." He watched the boy go and felt the world rearrange itself. Doctrine nudged, custom cracked. The first roots of a different strength hunting stone for purchase. The council hall was a circle of dark wood and iron, banners heavy in the stillness. Counselors stood when Ronan entered. Shock had thinned some faces, calculation sharpened others. Edda's quill already waited on fresh parchment. Varric's chair sat empty, a wound in furniture. Ronan did not take the throne at the head. He walked to the center of the circle and stood on the inlaid iron wolf that guarded their laws. Mira stayed at the edge with Rowan, as if ready to be stone or storm according to need. "Speak your account," Counselor Jarek said stiffly, playing his part. Protocol before passion, Ronan did. He told them the story without tremor, the summons that wasn't his, the chamber below, the blade, the silver, the choice. He did not clean the tale to flatter anyone. When he finished, the room had learned the taste of silence. "General Varric claims he acted to preserve tradition," Jarek said at last. Ronan met the circle's eyes one by one. "Tradition that cannot survive a boy's leg mended or a king's life saved is not tradition," he said. "It is habit, and habit is a coward dressed as wisdom." A murmur like wind through winter grass. Edda's quill scratched, then paused. "What law then?" she asked quietly. "This," Ronan said. He raised his voice not to shout, only to ensure the words found every corner. "By right of crown and pack, the code of endurance is amended. Strength will no longer be measured by how much pain a body can bear in silence, nor by how many we can break and still stand over. From this morning forward, strength is measured by how many we can keep standing beside us. Mercy is not rot, it is mortar. Healing is not softness, it is strategy. A wolf who lifts a fallen packmate is to be honored, not shamed. A healer's hands will be considered the equal of a warrior's claws." He let the last sentence settle, then added, "And no law of this keep will forbid the saving of a life." The room breathed out as if a band had been cut. Some faces blanched, others bloomed. Old men stared at the iron wolf under his boots and found it look different when light hit it from a new angle. "Varric will answer for treason," Ronan said. The grief in his voice made the words heavier, not lighter. "Not for doctrine. Doctrine is mine to shape. Betrayal is not. You would execute him?" Jarek asked carefully. Ronan's jaw worked once. "I would not waste a good lesson," he said, and turned to Rowan. "Bring him." They brought Varric between two guards. He looked smaller without his armor. Fury tried to make up the measure and failed. He met Ronan's gaze with something like pity. "You pulled the world's teeth to kiss it," he said. "It will bite your throat just the same." Ronan stood very still. "I am done living with my throat bared to ghosts," he answered. "You taught me to fear softness until it hardened into cruelty. I refused the inheritance." He did not call for a headsman. Instead, he spoke so the hall would remember. "Varric, for conspiracy against your king and an attempt on his life, you are stripped of rank and exiled beyond the North Fork with nothing but what you can carry. If you return, you will be taken as an enemy. If you live long enough to learn what strength is without boy's blood to prove it." Shock rippled. Exile caused less spectacle than death and more courage to maintain. It denied martyrdom. It named consequence without feeding myth. Varric's mouth thinned. He bowed not in respect but acknowledgement. "You'll beg my ghost for counsel when the first winter breaks your new law," he said, and allowed himself to be led away. "Write it," Ronan told Edda, "all of it, clear." She dipped her quill, eyes bright. "With pleasure, my king." He turned then away from the circle that would spend the morning parsing precedent to the edges where stories took root. Mira watched him, hands clasped at her stomach as if to keep the light from escaping just because it wanted to. "Come," he said softly. They stepped into the courtyard as the second bell rang. Frost still silvered the stone, but the sun had teeth now and used them gently. Word moved faster than bells. Servants gathered along galleries. Recruits spilled from the yard in disciplined lines that frayed into curiosity at the edges. Soren elbowed his way to the front and stopped himself from running the last 3 steps. Ronan raised a hand. The keep quieted without effort. He didn't stand on a dais or call for a drum. He stood where the light fell, with Mira at his side and Rowan a half step back, and let the morning do some of the speaking. "Hear me," he called, voice carrying like bread scent. "By my word and the council's witness, the law is changed. We do not become strong by breaking ourselves for the pleasure of those who watch. We become strong by refusing to leave each other on the ground. A wounded wolf is not shame. A healed wolf is not soft. From this day, any who mock aid will answer to me." Silence then sound. Hesitant at first, a scatter of palms striking leather bracers, one laugh that escaped like a bird from a net and embarrassed itself into quiet. Then more, a surge of cheers that found its shape in pride, not defiance. Even the stones seemed to hold the noise less grudgingly. Ronan lifted his palm again and the wave slowed, curled, settled. He faced Mira in front of everyone and did the thing no law required. He bowed. Not long, not theatrical, just enough. Gasps unspooled and remade themselves into something like awe. For your hands, he said, pitched for her and for all. For your light, for showing us our strength belongs somewhere we'd forgotten. The flush that climbed Mira's throat felt like dawn had taken up residence under her skin. You stood between me and death, she answered, voice steady though her heart found new rhythms. We can count our saving in both directions. If you like, he smiled, then the first true one she'd seen in Narmerdan the fortress looked. For one brief, astonishing moment, like a place that might learn laughter in daylight. Train, Ronan told the yard at last. Well, heal quickly, we have a kingdom to guard. They dispersed with talk that didn't sound like knives. Lysa caught Mira at the stair and hugged her so fiercely the healer wheezed. You broke a law with a kiss, Lysa whispered in her ear, then pulled back, eyes wet. Well, if not a kiss, then something worse, better, Mira said, dizzy with a joy that felt like standing barefoot in new grass. Much better. When the crowd thinned, when duty called Rowan elsewhere and the quill scratch resumed behind closed doors, Ronan and Mira found the small arch at the fortress's eastern edge where the sun liked to enter. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching light climb the peaks and pour like honey down the black walls. I don't know how to be this king, he said quietly, as if confessing to the mountain rather than asking her to carry it. You already are, she said. You woke and chose. He turned. The sunrise lived in his eyes now, not just the iron. He lifted his hand and tucked a stray curl behind her ear with the care of a man who had learned the cost of bruising. Stay, he said, not command, not plea. Invitation. I was already here, she answered. It was easy, then, to close the space between them. The kiss they'd nearly found in the dark found them in daylight, brief, certain. A seal pressed to warm wax, a howl rose from the outer wall, one voice, then another, then a third, layering until the sound braided into something that didn't sound like hunger or warning anymore. It sounded like a map redrawn, like a pact deciding what to be under a new moon. Peace didn't arrive like a banner. It arrived like this, breath shared in sunlight. A lore written in the mouths of boys who would live to teach it. The mountain breathing with the keep instead of against it. The sun cleared the last ridge. Light spilled over stone. Wolves on the parapet lifted their voices, an answer and an oath. And in the courtyard below, the iron keep learned to hold strength the way hands hold water, cupped, careful, enough for more than one.